They told me to stop recording. Not in a dramatic way, not with a slammed door or raised voices, just a gentle look from a supervisor at the end of a long shift, like he was trying to save me from myself. "You're doing too much," he said. He didn't ask what I meant by bigger. He didn't ask what I'd seen. He just looked down at the little black recorder on my desk like it was a bad habit. But I kept doing it. I kept recording because the thing about the subway, about those tunnels under New York, is that it eats details. It eats time. It eats certainty. You can walk down a corridor you've walked 100 times and come back swearing the walls moved an inch closer together while you weren't looking. And if you don't trap the memory somewhere outside your head, it changes. This is me trapping it. This is me saying it in a way that can't be argued with later. This is me making it real because it keeps trying to become not real. Not real. Real. Not real. My name doesn't matter. It mattered on paper, on my badge, on the roster taped behind the booth window. It mattered in the way people said it when they needed something from me. But it doesn't matter here, on this recording. Because whatever happened down there didn't happen to a name. It happened to a person in uniform who thought tunnels were just tunnels. A transit police officer on a night shift, doing what transit police do, keeping people from getting hurt, keeping the city moving, keeping the ugly parts of the system out of sight. You learn early that the subway has its own weather. It breathes, it sweats. It carries heat up in winter and drags cold down in summer. It has currents you feel on your skin when a train moves somewhere you can't see. And then there are the sounds. Some of them you get used to, the distant metallic scream of wheels in a curve, the dry click of signals, the hum in your teeth when a train pulls power, the way the platform always seems to have one constant drip somewhere, like it's counting seconds for you. Other sounds you never get used to, because they're not supposed to be there. The first time I heard it, I told myself it was nothing. That's how you survive in this job. You name the fear something ordinary until it stops trying to claw at you. You say it's a rat. You say it's a kid messing around. You say it's a maintenance crew. You say it's the wind. It wasn't the wind. I can't tell you the station, not because it's classified, because the name sticks in my throat. Because every time I try to say it out loud, the word feels wrong in my mouth. Like it isn't the right label for the place I actually went. I can tell you what it smelled like, though. Old electricity, wet concrete, that sharp, sour edge of trash that's been pressed into a corner for too long. A metallic tang that isn't blood, isn't rust, but something close to both. Like the rails themselves are tired and sweating out their age. It was late. Not midnight late. Later than late. The kind of hour where time stops feeling like a line and starts feeling like a room you can't find the exit to. The platform was almost empty, but not completely. It never is. Even at the deadest hours, the city leaves a few pieces of itself scattered down there. A man asleep with his boots on, a woman holding a bag like it's the last thing she owns, someone staring at the tracks like they're waiting for an answer to rise out of the dark. My job was to watch, to intervene if something happened, and something did. I noticed him because he didn't fit into the platform the way everyone else did. Everyone down there has a rhythm, even the ones standing still. They shift their weight, check their phone, scratch their nose, look up at the sign, glance down the tunnel for headlights like they can will the train into existence. This man didn't do any of that. He stood near the edge, not too close to fall, but close enough that it bothered me. His posture was straight, almost formal, hands at his sides, head tilted slightly like he was listening to something the rest of us couldn't hear. He was dressed like a commuter. Jacket, dark pants. Nothing theatrical, nothing that screamed trouble. But something about him made the fluorescent lights feel harsher, made the space between the columns feel longer. I watched him for a while, waiting for the moment where he'd move like a human being. He didn't. So I approached. That's procedure. You see someone acting odd near the edge, you check. You ask if they're all right. You offer help. You prevent accidents before they become reports. I got maybe 10 feet from him, and the air changed. That's the only way I can describe it. The air on the platform is usually thick with warmth and stale breath and the city's underground sweat. But around him, it felt cleaner, not fresher. Cleaner in a way that made my skin tighten, like walking into an empty room after a party and realizing everyone left without you noticing. He didn't turn as I came up beside him, didn't look at me. His gaze stayed fixed down the tunnel. "Sir," I said. No reaction. I tried again, a little louder. Still nothing. That's when I noticed his shoes. They were clean, impossibly clean for a subway platform. No grime, no scuff, no damp stains, like he'd never stepped on the ground of the city at all. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I'm telling it because it matters. I reached out and touched his shoulder. Just a light tap. The kind you do to someone you don't want to startle. His jacket felt cold. Not cold like outside air. Cold like a metal handrail in winter. Cold like something that doesn't belong against skin. He turned his head slowly, and when his face came into view, my mind did the thing it always does when it sees something it can't file properly. It tried to make it normal. It tried to say, "That's a guy. That's just a tired guy. That's just a guy with shadows on his face. That's just a guy with eyes reflecting the lights weird. Not real. Real, not real." His eyes were open, but he wasn't looking at me. He was looking through me, past me, like I was a sign on the wall he'd already read. Then he spoke, and his voice didn't match his mouth. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like I'm trying to dress it up. But listen to me. His lips moved, yes, but the sound came from somewhere deeper. Somewhere behind him. Somewhere down the tunnel. That was it. 2 words, but the way he said them made my stomach twist, like he was stating a fact no one else remembered, like he was warning me without warning me. I swallowed. I went into professional mode. Because when you don't know what else to do, you become the job. I asked. He smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It wasn't cruel either. It was practiced. Like he'd seen people smile and was mimicking the shape of it. "Down," he said. And then he stepped off the platform. Not like a jump. Not like a stumble. He stepped down as calmly as if there were stairs there. 1 foot onto the ties between the rails, then the other. My body moved before my brain did. Training. Pure training. I lunged forward, arm out, and shouted for him to stop. But when I reached, my hand grabbed empty air. He was already walking away from the platform, down the tracks, into the tunnel. And he moved like he belonged there. I leaned over the edge and yelled again, louder, the sound of my voice bouncing back wrong. He didn't turn. I reached for my radio, thumb pressing the button hard enough to hurt. "Control, this is," I started. And then the radio hissed and drowned my words in static. Not the usual interference. Not the kind you curse and adjust. This was thick, deliberate. Like someone held a microphone up to an ocean. I tried again. Nothing but static. The man kept walking. Every instinct screamed at me. Third rail, incoming train. Don't go down there. Don't become the story. But another part of me, some stubborn, stupid part, couldn't let him vanish into the dark. Couldn't let him become a question mark in a report. So I went down after him. I dropped onto the gravel, boots crunching, and the platform above felt suddenly far away. The lights up there seemed too bright, too safe, like they didn't belong to the same world. I started walking, keeping my eyes on his back. He was maybe 30 feet ahead, and the tunnel swallowed the distance between us, like it wanted him to get away. The farther he went, the less his outline made sense. Like the darkness was erasing him in strokes. I kept calling out, but my voice sounded smaller the deeper I went. And then I saw it. On the wall to my right, in white chalk, faint but fresh, someone had written a sentence. The letters were neat, careful, almost polite. Not your line. I stopped walking. The man stopped too. Slowly, he turned his head, just enough that I could see the side of his face in the dim emergency lights. I should have listened. I should have climbed back up and pretended he never existed. But I took one more step forward, and that's when he vanished. Not into a corner, not behind a pillar, not into shadow. He simply wasn't there anymore. 1 second, a man walking the tracks. Next second, empty tunnel, like someone cut a frame out of a film. I froze. My mouth went dry. My heart beat once, hard, like it was trying to punch its way out of my ribs. Not real. Real. Not real. I stared down the tunnel until my eyes watered, waiting for him to reappear, waiting for my brain to correct itself. Nothing. Just the tunnel breathing, just the low hum of power, just the faint, endless drip somewhere in the dark, counting time like it had all the time in the world. And behind me, back toward the platform, I heard footsteps. Not mine. Not fast. Not running. Slow, careful. Approaching as if whoever it was already knew exactly where I stood. I turned. And the tunnel behind me was empty too. That's the part people don't understand when I try to explain. They assume it's a simple thing. You saw someone, then you didn't. A trick of light. A person ducking into an access door. But there were no doors where he stood. There was nowhere to go. And still, he was gone. I backed up one step at a time, trying not to look away from the dark ahead, because it felt like if I looked away, something would fill that space. The chalk words on the wall seemed brighter now, like they'd been rewritten while I blinked. Not your line. As I climbed back up onto the platform, my hands shook so badly I had to grip the edge with both of them. The fluorescent lights above felt wrong. Too loud, too flat, too normal. I pulled myself up and stood there, breathing hard, staring down at the tracks like the tunnel might offer an explanation. But all it offered was darkness. And then, over my radio, clear as day, with no static at all, a man's voice said my badge number. Softly, patiently, like it had been waiting for me to come close enough to hear. That's when I started recording. Because I knew, with a cold certainty that settled behind my eyes, that if I didn't, the story would start changing. It would start being not real. And I needed it to stay real. Not real. Real. Not real. I didn't put the recorder away after that night. I told myself it was for documentation, for clarity, for my own protection. That's what you say when you're afraid your memory is going to betray you. The official report I filed the next morning was clean. Too clean. Man observed trespassing on tracks, lost visual contact, no further incident, no injuries, no delays. Case closed before it ever opened. That version fit neatly into the system. The system likes things that end. What it didn't like, and what I didn't include, was the way my radio said my badge number without interference. Or how the voice paused between digits, like it was savoring them. Or how, when I looked down at the display afterward, the channel indicator was blank. Not zero. Not emergency. Blank. I didn't sleep much after that. When I did, I dreamed in segments. Platforms without trains, trains without cars, tunnels that curved in on themselves like ribs. I'd wake up with the feeling that I'd missed something important while I was unconscious. Like the city had moved on without me and forgotten to tell me where it went. I came back to the same station 2 nights later. Not because I was assigned to it. I volunteered. Told my supervisor I wanted to familiarize myself with the late shift flow. He raised an eyebrow but signed off. Familiarity is a word that makes people comfortable. It sounds like control. The platform looked the same. Same tiles, same columns, same gum-spotted concrete. But I noticed things I hadn't before. The lights flickered in a pattern that didn't repeat. Not random. Deliberate. Like a language I didn't know how to read yet. There was a maintenance map bolted to the wall near the end of the platform. I'd passed it 100 times. This time, I stopped and studied it. The printed lines showed the tunnel layout branching cleanly, logically. Emergency exits marked. Access corridors labeled. I followed the diagram with my finger, then looked up and tried to match it to the physical space. It didn't line up. The tunnel mouth at the far end of the platform sat a few feet to the left of where it should have been. Not enough to raise alarms. Enough to make your eyes slide past it unless you were looking hard. I told myself it was perspective. Old infrastructure. Settling. Not real. Real. Not real. I walked the platform slowly, letting my boots set the pace. There were fewer people than usual. One man asleep on a bench, jacket pulled over his face. A woman near the stairs scrolling her phone, thumb moving too fast for what she was probably reading. No sign of the man from before. Still, my shoulders stayed tight. I kept glancing down the tunnel, half expecting to see a shape where no shape should be. I didn't hear my badge number again, but I did hear something else. At first it sounded like water. A drip, maybe, echoing down from somewhere above. The subway is full of leaks. That's not strange. What was strange was the rhythm. It wasn't steady. Drip. Pause. Drip, drip. Long pause. It reminded me of someone thinking. I followed the sound toward the far end of the platform, past the yellow line, close enough that I could feel the pull of air when a train passed on another track deeper in the system. The sound wasn't coming from above. It was coming from the tunnel. I leaned forward, careful not to cross the line, and peered into the dark. The emergency lights cast a weak glow, just enough to show the first few yards of track. Beyond that, the tunnel swallowed everything. I called quietly. The word felt stupid as soon as it left my mouth. The drip stopped. Silence pressed in, thick and expectant. The kind of silence that makes you aware of your own breathing, your own pulse. I waited, counting seconds without meaning to. Then, from far down the tunnel, I heard a sound that wasn't water. Footsteps. Slow, measured, coming toward the platform. My mouth went dry. My hand drifted toward my radio without touching it. I didn't want to break whatever this was. I wanted to see it clearly. A shape emerged at the edge of the light. Not the man, not exactly. This figure was taller, thinner. The proportions felt off, like someone had stretched a silhouette without checking the details. It walked along the ties between the rails, feet placing themselves carefully, deliberately, as if it knew exactly where it could step safely. As it came closer, I realized it wasn't one person. It was many. Not physically, don't misunderstand me. But the way it moved, the way its outline seemed to shift, reminded me of watching reflections overlap in dark glass, faces where faces shouldn't be, expressions half formed, then gone. I took a step back. The figure stopped. We stood there, separated by the edge of the platform and the logic that said it couldn't cross that boundary. I waited for it to speak. It didn't. Instead, I felt something else. A pressure low and steady behind my eyes, like a memory trying to surface that didn't belong to me. I saw flashes. A man dropping a wallet and stepping backward to retrieve it. A woman running for a train that had already left. A kid daring his friends to go closer to the edge. Moments. Ordinary moments. Then the pressure eased, and the figure tilted its head. Not in curiosity, in recognition. "You came back," it said. The voice wasn't deep or distorted. It sounded like any other voice you might hear underground. That was the worst part. It was too normal. Too practiced. "I'm on duty," I said, because that's what I had. A script. The figure's mouth moved, but the words came from somewhere else again, from behind the walls, from the dark spaces between stations. "Not this line," it said. My heart kicked hard. I asked. The figure's outline rippled, just slightly. "Forward," it said. "Sideways." Those weren't directions. They were concepts. I backed away until my calves hit a bench. I didn't sit. I didn't look away. "People don't just disappear," I said, more to myself than to it. The figure smiled. Not wide, not cruel. Familiar. "They do," it said. The lights flickered, and for a split second, I saw the platform empty. No benches, no tiles. Just raw concrete and darkness stretching back where the station should have been. Then the lights stabilized. The figure was gone. I stood there for a long time after that, staring into the tunnel, waiting for my hands to stop shaking. Eventually, commuters arrived. The station filled back in around me like a set being reassembled. No one else seemed to notice anything wrong. That was when I understood something important. Whatever this was, it wasn't interested in spectacle. It didn't want witnesses. It wanted participants. I went home at the end of the shift and pulled out an old notebook I hadn't used in years. The first page was blank. The paper smelled faintly of dust and ink. I wrote down everything I could remember, every word, every pause, every wrong feeling. Halfway through, I noticed something written at the bottom of the page, in a handwriting that looked almost like mine. "Not your line." I don't remember writing it. That's when the fear changed shape. It wasn't about the tunnels anymore. It was about what was already inside my head, waiting for the right moment to speak. I stopped trusting the notebook after that. Not completely. I still wrote in it. I just stopped believing it was passive. I numbered the pages. I dated every entry. I underlined my own handwriting like I was checking someone else's work. When you feel reality slipping, You start building little fences around facts, hoping they'll hold. They didn't. The next time I went into the tunnels, it wasn't voluntary. A call came in near the end of my shift. Trespass alert. Motion sensors triggered in a maintenance corridor 2 stations down from where I'd first seen the man. The dispatcher's voice was flat, bored, routine. I remember thinking, very clearly, that this was how it starts. Not with a choice, with paperwork. I acknowledged the call and headed down, my body moving on autopilot while my mind lagged behind, dragging its feet. The access door was one I'd passed 100 times without really seeing. Gray metal, stenciled warnings, a lock that looked older than the wall it was set into. It opened easily. Too easily. The corridor beyond was narrower than I expected. The ceiling dipped low enough that I could feel it pressing on the space above my head. The lights were spaced far apart, leaving long stretches of shadow between pools of pale yellow. I told myself this was normal. Older sections, budget cuts, deferred maintenance. Not real. Real. Not real. My boots sounded wrong on the concrete. The echoes didn't come back clean. They stretched, smeared, like someone dragging a finger through wet paint. As I walked, I noticed markings along the wall. Not graffiti, not official signage. Lines scratched into the concrete, shallow but deliberate. Groups of them, clustered together, then long blank stretches. I slowed down and ran my fingers over one cluster. 5 lines. A pause. 5 more. Tally marks. I pulled my hand back quickly, as if the wall might notice me touching it. The corridor sloped downward, subtly at first, then more noticeably. I checked my bearings against the map in my head. This wasn't right. This section shouldn't descend like this. It should level out and connect back to the main tunnel. It didn't. The air grew colder the deeper I went, not damp cold, not draft cold. It felt filtered, processed, like the warmth had been taken out of it on purpose. I keyed my radio and gave a status update. My voice sounded distant to my own ears, like it had already traveled somewhere before reaching me. No response. I stopped walking. That pressure returned behind my eyes, heavier this time. Images pressed in again, sharper than before. A man arguing with himself at the edge of the platform. A woman standing too close, convinced she could hear her name being called from below. A teenager filming the dark, laughing, daring it to do something. They weren't memories. They were records. I leaned against the wall, breathing slowly, counting heartbeats. When the pressure eased, I realized I wasn't alone in the corridor anymore. Someone was standing behind me. I didn't hear them arrive. No footsteps, no shift of air. Just the sudden, undeniable awareness of another presence, close enough that I could feel it stealing my heat. I turned. It was the man from the platform, or something wearing him. He looked clearer here, away from the station lights. His face was sharper, more defined, but still wrong in small ways. His eyes reflected too much. His shadow didn't match his stance. "You're not supposed to be here," I said. He smiled, the same careful smile. "You followed," he replied. "You disappeared," I said. He tilted his head. I glanced past him, back the way I'd come. The corridor stretched on, identical in both directions. Same lights, same scratches, same narrowing walls. "I need you to come with me," I said, "because that's what the job requires." He didn't move. Instead, he stepped closer. I braced myself for cold again, but this time there was no temperature, no sensation at all. It was like standing next to a gap in space, a place where something should be and wasn't. He asked. They slip, I said. They get pushed. He shook his head gently. My stomach dropped. To the part of the city that doesn't get used anymore, he said. The corridor lights flickered, and for a moment, I saw past him, past the walls. The tunnels branched and overlapped in ways no map could explain. Old lines intersected with newer ones at impossible angles. Dead ends opened into wide chambers that weren't on any plan. Names were carved into the concrete, some fresh, some so worn they were barely scratches. All of them had dates. Some were decades old. Some hadn't happened yet. I blinked, and the vision collapsed back into the narrow corridor. My radio crackled to life. Not static. Voices, layered, overlapping. Too many to separate. I recognized one of them. Mine. Not from now, from earlier. From the night on the platform. I heard myself asking if he was all right. I heard the echo of my own confusion, looping, folding in on itself. I clutched the radio and turned it off. The man watched me calmly. You hear it now, he said. I came back because it's my job, I said. But the words felt thin. Jobs are just lines, he replied. I thought of the chalk words on the wall, of the writing in my notebook. Not your line, I asked. His smile faded, just a little. They stopped waiting, he said. The corridor shifted. I don't mean it collapsed or moved dramatically. It adjusted. The walls leaned in a fraction. The ceiling dipped lower. The air thickened, pressing against my chest. I felt a pull then, gentle but insistent, like gravity had decided on a new direction. Down, sideways, forward, not real, real, not real. I took a step back. The man frowned, as if disappointed. You're not ready, he said. He stepped aside, and for the first time I saw what was behind him. Not darkness. A space, wide, open, wrong. It looked like a station, but unfinished. No tiles, no signs. Just concrete platforms stretching into nothing, lined with pillars that didn't cast shadows. Figures stood along the edge, motionless, facing the tracks. All of them were listening. I staggered backward, my heel catching on the uneven floor. I fell hard, the impact knocking the air from my lungs. When I looked up, the corridor was empty. No man, no opening. Just the narrow passage and the hum of distant power. I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, afraid that if I stood up, it would change again. Eventually, I forced myself to my feet and walked back the way I thought I'd come from. It took longer than it should have. When I finally emerged onto a platform, it wasn't the one I expected. The signs were different. The tiles were a different color. The station name was one I didn't recognize. I checked my watch. Only 12 minutes had passed. At home that night, I opened my notebook with shaking hands. There were 3 new pages filled in, my handwriting, describing the corridor, the man, the space beyond. At the bottom of the last page, a new sentence waited for me. You almost crossed. I closed the notebook and sat in the dark, listening to the city breathe above me. That was the night I stopped pretending this was an investigation. It wasn't about finding answers anymore. It was about figuring out how long I had before the line moved again. I didn't report the corridor. That decision sits heavier on me than anything else I've said so far. Not because it was wrong, though it was, but because of how easy it felt. Like the system itself had leaned in and quietly suggested it. Like omission was just another form of procedure. I told myself there would be time later, that I needed to understand it first, that bringing other people into it too soon would only make it harder to control. That was the lie. The truth was simpler. I didn't want anyone else listening. Because once you hear it, really hear it, you don't get to decide what it does to you. I kept working. That's important. I didn't quit. I didn't spiral outward in any visible way. I showed up early. I filled out reports. I nodded in briefings. On the surface, I was reliable. Underneath, I was cataloging cracks. I started riding the trains end to end on my off hours. Not in uniform, just another face in the crowd. I watched how people behaved near the edges of platforms, who lingered, who leaned forward just a little too far, who seemed to be listening instead of waiting. There were more of them than I expected. You can tell, once you know what to look for. Their eyes don't track trains. They track space. Their bodies angled toward the dark, not the light. When the wind from an incoming train hits, they don't flinch. Sometimes they whisper to themselves. I followed one once, a woman in a long coat, moving with purpose but no destination. She transferred lines twice without checking signs, like she already knew where everything went. I stayed a few steps back, close enough to hear her when she spoke. She kept repeating the same phrase under her breath. When she reached the platform at an older station, one of the ones with narrower platforms and columns too close together, she stopped. She stood exactly where the man had stood that first night. I waited. My heart beat so loudly, I was sure she could hear it. I told myself that if she stepped over the line, I would intervene. I would be a cop again. She didn't. Instead, she turned her head slightly and looked right at me. Her eyes widened, just a little, and she smiled. Not the practiced smile, not the careful one. This one was relieved. "You hear it too," she said. I didn't answer. She nodded, as if that was enough, and stepped back into the crowd just as a train roared in, swallowing her. I never saw her again. I started visiting the transit archives, old reports, incident logs, maintenance records that no one had digitized because no one thought they mattered anymore. I learned quickly which clerks would look the other way if you asked with confidence. Patterns emerged. Disappearances that weren't disappearances. Accidents without witnesses. People last seen walking along tracks where no service should have been running. Every case ended the same way. No body, no footage, no answers. I noticed something else too. The reports were written differently. Not sloppy, not rushed, just empty. Like the writers were trying very hard not to think about what they were describing. Like they were copying words from somewhere else without understanding them. I found one report dated decades back, written by a transit officer whose name I didn't recognize. The handwriting was tight, controlled. The language precise. At the bottom of the page, in smaller letters, a note had been added later. Officer reassigned. No further incidents. I photocopied the report and took it home. That night, I dreamed of the corridor again. But this time, it wasn't empty. People stood along the walls, shoulder to shoulder, facing inward. None of them spoke. None of them moved. When I woke up, the photocopy was folded on my nightstand. I don't remember putting it there. In the margin, next to the officer's name, someone had written a question. How long did you last? I stopped sleeping after that. Sleep is dangerous when your mind has learned new paths. It wanders. It listens. I began to hear things during the day. Not voices, not exactly. More like impressions. A sense of direction that didn't match the maps. A pull in my chest when I stood on certain platforms, urging me toward tunnels that weren't marked. I tested it once. I closed my eyes at the center of a busy station and let myself turn slowly, ignoring the noise, the movement, the press of people. When I stopped, my body was angled toward a service door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." The pull was unmistakable. Not real. Real. Not real. I didn't open the door. Not that day. Instead, I started recording again, not just my own thoughts, but the city. Descriptions of stations, snippets of overheard conversations, times and dates. I wanted to anchor myself, but the recordings began to blur together. I would play one back and hear myself describing a place I hadn't been yet, mentioning stations I wouldn't visit until days later, warning myself about things I didn't remember learning. Once in the middle of a recording, my voice paused. There was a long stretch of silence. Then my voice resumed, quieter. I don't remember saying that. I began to feel watched, not by cameras, not by supervisors, but by the system itself. Like the tunnels were aware of my attention and adjusting accordingly. Routes shifted. Doors that should have been locked stood open. Lights failed in clusters, always ahead of me, never behind. I saw the man again in reflections, in train windows, in dark glass. Standing just out of alignment, his image lagging behind mine by half a second. He never looked directly at me. He didn't have to. One evening, as I stood alone on a platform waiting for a train that was running late, I felt the pull stronger than ever. My feet carried me to the edge without conscious thought. I looked down. For a moment, I didn't see tracks. I saw the unfinished station again, the wide platforms, the listening figures. They were closer this time, close enough that I could make out their faces. Some of them looked like people I'd passed on the street. Some of them looked like me. I stepped back hard, gasping. A train screamed into the station, lights blazing, reality snapping back into place. Around me, no one noticed anything wrong. I laughed then. A short, sharp sound that startled the man beside me. I told myself I was tired, overworked, imagining things. But even as I thought it, I knew the truth. I wasn't imagining it. I was being oriented, shown where the lines were, and more importantly, shown how easily they could be crossed. The thing about being oriented is that once you are, it's hard to pretend you aren't. I tried. I really did. I told myself that knowledge didn't equal obligation, that awareness wasn't the same as consent. I kept repeating it in my head like a mantra, especially when the pull got stronger. Not real. Real. Not real. But the city had started responding to me. I noticed it first in small ways. Trains I needed arrived just as I reached the platform, doors opening in front of me like an invitation. Routes I took without thinking shaved minutes off my commute, even when the system was running behind. Service doors I'd sworn were sealed swung open at a touch. It felt less like luck and more like accommodation, like I'd been acknowledged. The recordings changed too. I began finding new ones on my recorder, files I didn't remember making. They were always short, 30 seconds, a minute at most, just enough to unsettle me. In one, my voice whispered directions. Not this one. Next. In another, I heard footsteps in the background and my own breathing, fast and uneven, followed by a quiet sentence that made my hands shake when I replayed it. I started carrying the recorder turned off, batteries removed, sealed in my bag. It still filled up. The man appeared more frequently after that. Not fully. Never standing in front of me the way he had in the corridor. Just pieces of him. A shoulder in a reflection. A face in the dark window of a parked train, gone when I turned my head. Once, I saw his shoes. Clean, untouched. They were standing at the edge of a platform across the tracks from me. I blinked, and they were gone. I began to realize something that scared me more than the disappearances. He wasn't following me. He was pacing me, waiting for me to reach a point he'd already passed. The breaking point came on a night when everything lined up too neatly to be coincidence. I was dispatched to check a signal fault at an older station, one that had been slated for renovation for years and never quite made it to the top of the list. The platforms there were narrower, the ceilings lower. The kind of place where sound lingered too long. The fault cleared itself before I arrived. That should have been the end of it. Instead, I felt the pull, stronger than ever. It tugged at me from the far end of the platform, toward a section cordoned off by temporary barriers and warning tape. Construction signage promised future improvements that never seemed to come. I stood there for a long time, staring at the tape. Every instinct I had said not to cross it, not because of danger, but because of finality. Like stepping past it would lock something into place. I stepped past it anyway. The air on the other side felt heavier, as if the station had been holding its breath. The lights were dimmer, their hum uneven. The tiles on the walls were older here, stained and cracked, some missing entirely. There was a door at the end of the platform, not marked on any map, not locked. I rested my hand on the handle and hesitated. In that moment, I heard my own voice, not from the recorder, not from memory, but from somewhere close and behind me. I turned. No one was there. I opened the door. Beyond it was a stairwell descending into shadow. The steps were worn smooth, edges rounded by decades of use. A handrail ran along the wall, cool beneath my fingers. As I descended, the sounds of the station faded. No trains, no announcements, just the quiet rhythm of my steps. At the bottom, the stairwell opened into a wide space. The unfinished station. It was real. Not a vision, not a reflection. Concrete stretched out in both directions, the ceiling disappearing into darkness above. Pillars stood in uneven rows, their surfaces carved with names, dates, symbols I didn't recognize. Figures lined the platform edges. They stood close together, facing the tracks, heads tilted slightly, listening. None of them moved. I walked among them slowly, afraid to disturb whatever this was. As I passed, I recognized faces. The woman in the long coat, the sleeping man from the bench, the officer from the old report, his uniform outdated but unmistakable, and others I knew only vaguely. People I'd passed without noticing, fragments of the city's background noise. They were all waiting. I reached the center of the platform and stopped. The man stood there, fully present. He looked better, more solid, more complete. The wrongness that clung to him above ground seemed to settle into something stable here. "You found it," he said. "You showed it to me," I replied. He nodded. I asked. He considered the question. "It's a station," he said finally. My throat tightened. He smiled, not unkindly. I looked at the listening figures, at their stillness, their peace. Something in me ached. "You disappeared," I said. "They'll look for you." "They already did," he replied. I thought of the archive files, the empty language, the omissions. You could go back, he continued. You still have a platform, a badge, I asked. He glanced at the tracks. I crossed, he said simply. The pull intensified then, no longer gentle. It wrapped around my chest, my thoughts, my sense of direction. For the first time, I understood how easy it would be to stop resisting, to step forward, to listen. Not real. Real. Not real. I took a step back instead. The man watched me closely. Not yet, he said. The unfinished station dimmed, the figures blurred. The space folded in on itself like a thought being forgotten. I stumbled, caught myself, and suddenly I was back in the stairwell, climbing upward without remembering turning around. When I emerged onto the platform, a train was pulling in, doors sliding open. Commuters spilled out, brushing past me, solid and loud and alive. I stood there shaking, the taste of concrete dust still in my mouth. That was the night I understood the truth I'd been avoiding. The subway wasn't haunted. It was curated, and it had started making room for me. After that night, the city stopped pretending I was just another body moving through it. I don't know how else to say it. There was a shift. Not dramatic, not sudden, but unmistakable. Like the moment you realize a conversation has turned and you're no longer listening, you're being addressed. I began to notice absences more than presences. Empty spaces where people should have been. Benches that stayed unoccupied even during rush hour. Platforms that felt hollow, as if they were waiting to be filled with something specific and hadn't gotten it yet. And then, there were the moments that didn't line up. I would arrive at a station and feel certain I'd been there earlier that day, only to find no record of it on my schedule. I'd recognize a stain on the wall, a crack in the tile, the exact pattern of grime near the tracks. And yet my memory of being there felt older, worn thin at the edges, like something borrowed. The tapes reflected this before I could admit it to myself. When I listened back, I heard my voice describing places out of sequence, recounting events before they happened, warning myself about platforms I hadn't reached yet. At first I thought it was stress, fatigue, the mind filling in gaps. Then I found a tape labeled with tomorrow's date. I didn't listen to it right away. I carried it in my pocket all day, aware of its weight like a stone. Every time I moved, I felt it shift. A quiet reminder that something was waiting for me to press play. I made it through the shift on habit alone. Checked tickets, broke up a minor argument, helped a tourist find the right line. I spoke, I moved, I smiled when required. But I wasn't fully there. Part of me was already underground, standing on a platform that didn't officially exist, listening. I finally played the tape that night, alone in my apartment, lights off. My voice sounded calm, too calm. It's closer now, it said. You can feel it because it's adjusting around you. I stopped the recording. I sat there in the dark for a long time, breathing slowly, trying to anchor myself to the present, to the idea that time still moved forward in a straight line. Not real. Real. Not real. The next time I saw the man, he wasn't alone. I was on duty, standing near the end of a platform, watching a train disappear into the tunnel. The wind it left behind curled around my legs and tugged at my jacket. When the air settled, he was there, standing just beyond the yellow line. He looked exactly as he had the first night. Same clothes, same clean shoes, same careful posture. Beside him stood another figure. This one was younger, a teenager maybe. Backpack slung over one shoulder, headphones around his neck. He stared down the tunnel with the same fixed attention I'd seen in the others. "You shouldn't bring him here," I said. The words came out automatically, like I'd rehearsed them. The man didn't look at me. "He heard it," he replied. "I didn't bring him." The teenager shifted slightly, like he was uncomfortable standing still. His foot edged closer to the platform's edge. I stepped forward. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice even. He turned toward me, eyes unfocused. "I'm just waiting," he said. I asked. He frowned, searching for the word. The man finally looked at me then. "This is the part where you choose what kind of witness you are," he said. I felt the pull again, sharp and insistent. Not toward the tracks this time, but sideways. Toward the man. Toward the space he occupied, like he was standing in a doorway I couldn't quite see. I thought of all the reports, all the empty language, all the neat conclusions. I grabbed the teenager's arm. He startled, pulling back. The contact felt real, solid, grounding. "You're not going anywhere," I said. The man's expression shifted. Not anger, something closer to regret. "You can't stop it every time," he said. The train roared into the station, lights blazing, metal screaming against metal. The rush of sound and motion shattered the moment. When it passed, the platform was crowded again. The teenager was gone. So was the man. I stood there, heart pounding, staring at the place they'd been. No one around me reacted. No one looked confused. It was as if the space had simply corrected itself. That was the first time I realized something else. The man wasn't a guide. He was proof. Proof of what happens when you stop resisting. When you stop insisting that the lines mean something. And now, whether I wanted it or not, I was being positioned to replace him. The city began testing me after that. Doors opened at the wrong times. Signals held just long enough for me to notice. I would take a step and feel the ground hesitate beneath my foot, like it was waiting to see which direction I'd commit to. The unfinished station appeared more often, bleeding into my waking hours. I'd catch glimpses of it at the far ends of tunnels, layered behind the concrete like a second image. Sometimes I'd hear the listening figures breathing, not in unison, but in anticipation. I started skipping platforms without meaning to, riding past my stop and not realizing it until the doors closed again. When I looked out the window, the station names blurred together, letters sliding out of place. Once, I saw my own name on a pillar, carved deep, with a date that hadn't happened yet. I touched it, fingers shaking, and the concrete felt warm. That was when the tapes changed tone. Less warning, more instruction. "You're doing fine," my voice said in one. I stopped playing them after that. I didn't need to hear them anymore. The knowledge had settled in my bones. The haunting, if that's what you want to call it, was no longer about shadows, or voices, or missing people. It was about inevitability, about being slowly, carefully positioned at the edge of something vast and patient, and knowing, with a clarity that made my hands shake, that the city wasn't asking if I would cross the line. It was deciding when. There's a moment when something has been circling you long enough, where fear changes shape. It stops being sharp, stops flaring. It settles into something heavier, something almost thoughtful. You don't jump anymore when the lights flicker. You don't flinch when a voice says your name from somewhere it shouldn't. You start measuring your reactions instead of having them. That's where I was. I knew what was coming before it happened. I'd known since the unfinished station, since the tapes that spoke from ahead of me instead of behind. I just didn't know what form it would take. The city chose a quiet night. No delays, no emergencies. A smooth shift, the kind supervisors love because nothing needs explaining afterward. I remember thinking, briefly, that this was intentional. That the system had cleared the stage. I was assigned to a station I'd worked dozens of times. Familiar layout, familiar smells, familiar blind spots. I could have walked it with my eyes closed. As I descended the stairs, that certainty wavered. The rhythm of the steps felt off. Too many before the landing, too few after. I counted without meaning to, then stopped when the numbers stopped lining up. Not real. Real, not real. On the platform, the crowd was thin. A handful of people spaced far enough apart that each one felt isolated. No one spoke. No one made eye contact. I took my usual position near the center, back against a column, and waited. That's when I noticed the absence. There was no edge. The yellow line was there. The platform ended where it always had. But the feeling of boundary, the unspoken understanding of where you stop, was gone. The space beyond the line didn't feel like a drop. It felt like a continuation, like a step you hadn't taken yet. I heard my name, not spoken aloud, not exactly. It came to me the way a thought does when it's already half-formed. Familiar, comfortable. I turned, knowing what I'd see. The man stood a few feet away. He looked tired. Not physically. His clothes were still neat, his posture still precise. But there was a weariness to him now, like someone who'd been holding a position for too long. "You don't need to keep pretending," he said. I didn't answer. "You know where this goes," he continued. "I've seen enough," I said. He smiled faintly. I watched a train approach on the opposite track, its headlights swelling out of the dark. The sound grounded me just for a moment. I asked. He shook his head. I thought of the tapes, of my voice speaking to itself across time, of the notebook that wrote back. "I don't want this," I said. He looked genuinely surprised. "I want it to stop," I said. He glanced down the tunnel, then back at me. "It doesn't stop." The train thundered past, wind tearing at us, blurring the world into noise and motion. When it cleared, the platform was emptier. Too empty. The people who had been waiting were gone. No footsteps, no reactions, just absence. I felt the pull settle fully into place, no longer tugging, no longer coaxing. It was simply there, like gravity, like orientation. "You don't disappear," the man said quietly. I laughed then. I couldn't help it. A short, brittle sound that surprised even me. "You make it sound tidy," I said. He nodded. I thought of the officer in the old report, the reassignment, the silence that followed. I thought of the woman in the long coat, the teenager, the listening figures who weren't waiting anymore. I thought of how easily the system absorbed gaps. I asked. He considered this. "They stopped noticing," he said. "The lights flickered, not violently, just enough to remind me that they could." I stepped closer to the edge. The platform didn't protest. I looked down, expecting to see tracks, third rail, darkness. I saw the unfinished station, clear as day. The listening figures had turned. They were facing me now. I recognized more faces among them. Co-workers, commuters, people whose names I'd read once and forgotten. At the center of the platform below stood a familiar shape. Me, older, still, listening. My chest tightened. "That's not possible," I said. The man's voice was gentle. I felt something loosen inside me then. A knot I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. The constant resistance, the effort of staying aligned. I understood finally what he meant. The subway wasn't taking people. It was redistributing them, making room. I stepped back from the edge. The man's eyes widened. "You don't have to do it now," he said. "I know," I replied. I turned away from the tunnel and walked up the stairs, my legs unsteady, but moving. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Behind me, I felt the space adjust. At home, I packed a bag without really thinking about what I was putting into it. The recorder, the notebook, a change of clothes. Things that proved continuity. I sat at my table and pressed record one last time. "This is where it breaks," I said. "Not the tunnels, not the city." I paused, listening to the quiet of my apartment, to the distant, familiar rumble of trains beneath the floor. "I don't know how long I have," I continued. I closed the notebook. On the last page, beneath the previous message, a new line had appeared. "You are next in line." I crossed it out, hard. The ink bled through the paper. That was the first act of defiance that felt real. Not real. Real. Not real. I went to sleep anyway. And for the first time in weeks, I dreamed of nothing at all. I woke up before the alarm. That alone would have meant nothing once. In another life, it would have been ordinary. But by then, I measured mornings by what was missing, not what was there. The pull was quieter. That was the first thing I noticed. Not gone, never gone, but subdued, like something holding itself still so it wouldn't be noticed, waiting to see what I would do next. I didn't put on my uniform. That felt important. Symbolic, maybe, or maybe I just didn't want to give the city another way to recognize me. I dressed plainly, left my badge on the table, and stood for a long time staring at it, half expecting it to say something. It didn't. The recorder went into my pocket. The notebook stayed behind. I didn't trust it anymore. Outside, the city moved the way it always does in the early hours, half awake, pretending to be functional. Coffee carts, delivery trucks, people standing too close together without acknowledging each other. I blended in easily. That scared me more than anything else. The station I chose wasn't special. No history I knew of. No unfinished platforms, no rumors attached to it. Just concrete, tiles, schedules. The kind of place the system hides behind when it wants to look ordinary. As I went down the stairs, I felt it again. The subtle misalignment. An extra step. A missing one. The sense that the descent was longer than it should be. Not real. Real. Not real. The platform was nearly empty. I took a seat on a bench and waited. Time passed strangely down there. It always does. Minutes stretched, sounds softened. The tunnel breathed in and out, carrying the city's pulse with it. I watched the far end of the platform. Nothing happened. For a moment, a dangerous moment, I felt relief. Maybe defiance mattered. Maybe choosing not to cross was enough to break the sequence. Maybe the city, for all its patience, couldn't force a conclusion. That's when I noticed the recording light. On the recorder, still in my pocket, on. My heart dropped. I pulled it out slowly, as if sudden movement might attract attention. The red light stared back at me. Steady and calm, I hadn't turned it on. I didn't turn it off. I let it run. Across the platform, a man sat down. I didn't see him arrive. He was just there. Posture straight, hands resting on his knees. Clean shoes. He didn't look at me. We sat like that for a while, two commuters waiting for trains that weren't coming. "You left your badge," he said eventually. "I know," I replied. "That won't stop it," he said. He turned his head slightly, enough that I could see his profile. He looked lighter, less burdened, like he'd set something down and never picked it back up. "You can still walk away," he said. "Neither does staying," I said. He smiled at that. The platform lights dimmed, just a fraction, enough that the edges of things softened, enough that the yellow line seemed less definite. I felt the unfinished station beneath my feet, not as a vision, but as a suggestion, a presence waiting for alignment. "I'm not crossing," I said quietly. The man studied me. "That's new," he said. The tunnel exhaled. For a moment, just a moment, the pull loosened. I felt something give, like a joint flexing for the first time in too long. Then the sound came. Footsteps. Not approaching. Leaving. I looked down the platform and saw movement at the far end. A figure walking calmly toward the tunnel. Posture familiar, steps confident. It took me a second to understand what I was seeing. It was me. Not a reflection. Not a possibility. Me. Wearing my uniform. Walking exactly the way I do when I'm on duty. I stood up so fast the bench scraped loudly against the platform. I called. The figure didn't turn. It stepped off the platform and into the tunnel without hesitation, disappearing into the dark the way the man had that first night. The man beside me watched calmly. "There it is," he said. "You already crossed." My legs went weak. The platform corrected itself. The lights brightened. The sense of boundary snapped back into place. A train roared in, doors opening, people spilling out, noise flooding the space. The moment fractured, swallowed by normalcy. When I looked again, the man was gone. So was the version of me in the tunnel. I stood there, shaking, surrounded by people who didn't see anything wrong. On the recorder, later, I would hear my own voice whispering something I don't remember saying. I don't know what that means. I don't know which version of me you're hearing now. The one who walked away? Or the one who stepped off and learned how to listen? I only know this. The subway doesn't need everyone. It just needs enough. And if you've ever stood on a platform and felt the urge to lean forward, just a little. If you've ever felt like the dark was paying attention, then it's already closer than you think. I'm going to stop the recording now. Or maybe I already did. If this ends abruptly, if the silence feels too deliberate, if the hum beneath the city suddenly sounds like breathing, then it wasn't an accident. It was a handoff. And if you're hearing this, it already knows you.